Thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Ryan Quinn. I'm the Manager of Safety Services at Construction Safety Nova Scotia. I'll be moderating today's webinar. Today we're going to be covering a critical topic in occupational health and safety, which is the supervisor's role in the workplace. We will be exploring what happens when supervision fails, legal considerations, best practices, and what we can all do to improve supervision in our workplaces. A few housekeeping items to address. You'll notice that the chat feature has been disabled. On the top of the screen, left of center, you'll see a Q&A button. Please submit your questions there. We will save some time at the end of the webinar to answer your questions. As well, this webinar is being recorded and will be available on our website and social media, so you can view after and share with your colleagues. Now I have the honor of introducing Kyla Porter, OHS Advisor, Team Lead with Construction Safety Nova Scotia. Kyla will be leading the presentation today. So I'll hand it over to you, Kyla. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ryan. And good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us today as we discuss the incredibly important role of the supervisor in the workplace. So without further ado, let's get started. So to understand the supervisor's role and why it's so critical, we'll start with a real world example. And the particular case we're going to overview here illustrates what can happen when hazard recognition, communication, and supervision break down. The lessons that we can learn from this incident extend far beyond the workplace in which it occurred. They do apply to every supervisor directing workers and every employer who relies on their supervisors to represent them in the field. And we'll carry this example with us throughout our webinar today. So I'll ask you to keep it in mind as we weave through. So on August 16th of 2018, then 18-year-old Michael Henderson was killed while working on a construction project at a sewage treatment facility in Fredericton, New Brunswick. The circumstances surrounding the incident are important. Henderson was working inside an 8-foot deep excavation within a large concrete clarifier structure. A leak test was being conducted within that structure, using an inflatable plug that was designed to hold back thousands of liters of water. So while Henderson was working below, the testing began and the system was filled with water. He was never adequately informed that the test was taking place or that he was working adjacent to a pressurized plug. Ultimately, the plug failed, it shot from the pipe, pinned him against the wall, and the space rapidly filled with water. He was trapped underwater and did later die from his injuries. 5 years later, on September 12th of 2023, his supervisor, Jason King, was sentenced to 3 years in prison for criminal negligence causing death. This was not a case that involved intentional harm. It was a case involving failures to recognize hazards, communicate risks, follow safety requirements, and supervise work effectively. Those failures ultimately cost the young worker his life and resulted in criminal accountability for the supervisor. Here's a quote from Justice Thomas Christie. He summarized the failure in a very powerful statement. It says, "The death of Mr. Henderson resulted from a failure of Mr. King to know what he should do and a failure to do what he should have known he had to do." And the quote from the justice seems so jarring because both the employer and the worker rely on the supervisor to act as a trustworthy point of contact. The court found that the supervisor had not reviewed applicable safety requirements, failed to identify the work area as a confined space, failed to communicate hazards, and failed to implement appropriate controls. This was not a case about a missing form or a missing signature. It was about a failure to fulfill the fundamental responsibilities of supervision. So knowing your role as a supervisor is important, and acting on it is critical. So let's connect some of those lessons into a legal framework that applies to us in Nova Scotia. The OHS Act establishes the responsibilities of employers, supervisors, workers, and all other workplace parties. And many of the failures that were identified in the King case correspond directly to duties already established under occupational health and safety legislation in our province. So our legislation does establish minimum standards of care that are expected in every workplace. It defines the duties and responsibilities of workplace parties. It establishes worker rights. It provides enforcement mechanisms and consequences for noncompliance. And most importantly, it provides the framework for preventing incidents before they occur. So as a supervisor, you are responsible for knowing this information. And when you understand the legislation, you can lead with confidence. You can really grow into your role and try to help do your best to prevent incidents like the one we're talking about today. We know that everyone has responsibilities under the Act, and safety is not delegated to just one person or one department. That being said, the supervisor does play a particularly important role because they direct work activities and they make operational decisions day in and day out. The supervisor often determines whether safety policies and practices are adopted and followed consistently on the job, and they also set and enforce expectations for their crews. So before we continue, I want to present you with just a little scenario to think about, especially if you're in a supervisory position. Let's say you're on a project with your crew, there are other crews, other sub-trades from other employers, and you notice a worker from another crew or employer wearing an ill-fitted fall arrest harness. What do you do in that situation? Do you bring your concern forward, or do you think, not my crew, not my business, it's probably best if I stay out of it? Just think about that. What would you do in that situation? So with that question in mind, let's talk about the internal responsibility system. The internal responsibility system is the foundation of workplace safety. The principle behind it is very straightforward. Everyone shares responsibility to ensure health and safety of themselves and others at or near the workplace. So that includes coworkers, other crews from other employers, and those in the general public that may be near our work sites. Supervisors are the link that connects the worker and employer in this system. And if supervisors are not informed, engaged, or competent, the internal responsibility system essentially becomes ineffective. The internal responsibility system also outlines the three fundamental worker rights. So of course we have the right to know. So we have the right to know about workplace hazards, chemicals that we're using, the condition of the equipment that we're using day in and day out, and of course, general safety practices. We have the right to participate. So participating in health and safety activities, including hazard assessments, toolbox talks, inspections, training courses, your JOSH committee, your safety representative, all those types of things you can participate in. You also have the right to refuse. So employees can refuse work if they have reasonable grounds to believe that the work is unhealthy or dangerous to themselves or anyone else in their workplace. The King case that we talked about here at the start demonstrates why the right to know is particularly important. The court specifically noted that Henderson was not informed about the leak test that was being performed while he was working in the confined space, and therefore he had no meaningful opportunity to refuse the unsafe work. A worker cannot exercise their rights if they don't know the hazard exists to begin with. We also have a definition of competency that is defined in our occupational safety general regulations. It states that true competency requires three essential components. Those are knowledge, training, and experience. You need all three for true competency. It also states that you need to be knowledgeable about the act and regulations and the actual or potential dangers present in the work that's being undertaken. In the King case, the court heard that King had not reviewed company safety manuals and had not familiarized himself with his supervisory safety responsibilities. This serves as an important reminder for us that a job title alone does not make someone competent. Employers must ensure that supervisors have the knowledge and training necessary to fulfill their duties. Most occupational health and safety offenses are strict liability offenses. So this means that the Crown does not have to prove intent. It essentially means, guilty until proven innocent, not innocent until proven guilty. So the question becomes, did the employer or the supervisor take every reasonable precaution in the circumstances to prevent harm? The employer or the supervisor must be able to demonstrate due diligence to prove their innocence. So let's talk about due diligence. Due diligence essentially means being proactive. It means that employers and supervisors take every reasonable precaution to protect workers' health and safety. In action, due diligence looks like identifying hazards before workers are exposed, ensuring controls are implemented and followed, providing training and mentorship, correcting unsafe or improper work practices, and communicating matters that can impact health and safety. The best way to demonstrate your due diligence is by documenting the actions that you take. So every hazard assessment, every inspection, toolbox talk, every training plan you develop, even every disciplinary action, including verbal warnings, should all be documented and signed off on. Had a proper hazard assessment, confined space identification, communication, and planning occurred in the King case, the fatality would most likely have been prevented. Further to that, we'll take a look here at some of the duties and precautions that are outlined in the Act. So in our Act, it does tell us that employers must provide safe systems of work, tools, equipment, and materials. They must ensure that workers are trained for the job that they're performing. They must provide adequate supervision for the work being undertaken and the risks that are present. They must comply with the Act and consult with workers to address safety concerns, and they must maintain safety programs that reflect the work being performed. An important lesson from the King case is that supervisors need support. Employers cannot simply appoint someone as a supervisor and assume they understand their legal obligations. As the supervisor acts as a representative of the employer, a lot of similar responsibilities sit at the heart of that supervisor role. So supervisors need to take every precaution to ensure that health and safety of those under their supervision is priority. They need to enforce compliance with safe work practices, provide and ensure proper training, and of course, immediately correct any unsafe conditions that are noticed or reported to them on site. The court had concluded in the King case that the supervisor failed to fulfill these fundamental responsibilities, and this is why supervisor competency is so important. Because the best supervisors don't do this stuff just because they have to, just because it's law. They do it because it works, and it helps ensure that everyone goes home safe at the end of the day. Section 76 of our OHS Act is titled Deemed Act or Omission of Employer. So essentially what this says is that the actions of supervisors are often treated as the actions of the employer, and supervisors represent the employer in the field. Any failure by supervisors or employees in fulfilling their safety duties is viewed as a failure of the employer to maintain a safe workplace. This means that poor supervisory decisions can expose both the supervisor and the organization to significant legal consequences. Employers, therefore, have a strong interest in ensuring that supervisors are adequately trained and supported for their role. However, if the employer can prove that they have done everything reasonable to provide the required training, knowledge, information, and tools to the supervisor, and they could not have reasonably known of or consented to the act or the omission, then the act or omission may become the supervisor's direct responsibility. Everything we've discussed so far comes together here. So putting things together as a supervisor and really understanding that there are a lot of different elements that are involved in the role other than just the job title. So a supervisor's role really includes understanding legislation, maintaining that competency, exercising your due diligence, communicating hazards, and taking corrective actions, just to name a few. The Jason King case illustrates what can happen when these elements are absent. So it's incredibly important for supervisors and employers to really understand all the elements and help put those pieces together to form the full picture. Most workplace incidents are addressed through occupational health and safety legislation. However, some conduct can cross the line into criminal behavior. So we'll take a little look here at the Criminal Code of Canada. So that's the main law that defines what is considered a crime in Canada, along with the penalties and how cases are handled in court. So the criminal code addresses situations where conduct demonstrates a marked and substantial departure from what a reasonable person would do. So for leaders, it really does set the legal line between unsafe work and criminal behavior. And serious safety failures, especially those that lead to injury or death, can result in criminal charges. Many people assume that criminal liability only applies to employers, which is incorrect. Supervisors, managers, company leaders can all face personal criminal liability when they fail to take reasonable steps to protect workers. Again, the King case is a clear example here. A supervisor was convicted and imprisoned because his actions demonstrated criminal negligence. So criminal negligence is essentially akin to recklessness, right? Not just carelessness. And as many of you may know, on May 9th of 1992, 26 miners lost their lives in the West Drain mine disaster here in Nova Scotia due to an explosion caused by a buildup of methane gas and coal dust. Prior to that explosion, several safety concerns had been raised by employees, by union officials, and by government inspectors. But of course, we do know that in the end, there was fatality, there was loss of life there. Following that disaster, the West Dray Bill, or Bill C-45, was drafted and became law on March 31st, 2004. Section 217.1 of the Criminal Code creates a legal duty for anyone directing work to take reasonable steps to prevent bodily harm. So I'll actually just read the quote here directly for you. Everyone who undertakes or has the authority to direct how another person does work or performs a task is under a legal duty to take reasonable precautions to prevent bodily harm to that person or any other person arising from that work or task. So this duty clearly applies broadly. It suggests that anyone who directs work could be considered a supervisor. If you direct workers, if you assign tasks, or you control how work is performed, this section may apply to you regardless of a formal title. So the message here is simple. Leadership comes with legal responsibility at all levels. Okay. So supervisor is a point of trust. As mentioned earlier, workers, and especially I would say new or young workers, need to be able to trust their supervisors to help keep them safe at work. These relationships are a key element of workplace health and safety. So let's take a look at what it means to have a supervisor as a point of trust from, legal, cultural, and sort of interpersonal perspectives. The legislation assumes that supervisors will communicate honestly and effectively. The King case demonstrates the consequences when that communication fails. So supervisors occupy a unique position between workers and employers. Trust is really the foundation that supports both of these relationships. So employers trust supervisors to implement company policies, legal requirements, really uphold health and safety in the workplace on those job sites. Workers trust supervisors to identify hazards, communicate risks, and make safe decisions. They trust them to lead them and to prevent harm. In the Jason King case, that trust and communication broke down. As mentioned, the worker was not provided enough information to recognize the danger that was present or exercise his right to refuse unsafe work. When trust breaks down, safety systems fail, and people can be seriously injured or killed. Supervisors are in a unique position just due to how many competing priorities they have, right? So supervisors are constantly balancing workplace safety with production schedules, with budgets, with client expectations, external pressures. The list goes on and on. And the challenge is really ensuring that safety never becomes secondary to those production pressures. So, given the balancing act that's carried out by supervisors, if they do not consistently act truthfully and in good faith, it is unlikely that the spirit of the internal responsibility system will be present in the workplace. Workers must be able to believe that their concerns will be taken seriously, and they must be able to trust that hazards will be addressed. Without that trust, reporting begins to decrease and risk begins to skyrocket. So, as a leader, being trustworthy really starts with balancing the need for results with consideration for others. Trust is built through authenticity, through empathy and approachability, because people ultimately trust leaders that they like, leaders that they can relate to, leaders they feel comfortable with. It includes respecting the values of others, respecting different ideas, respecting different perspectives, and taking the time to really stop and listen when concerns are brought forward. Even if those concerns are, ones that aren't the biggest priority or it's just a matter of misunderstanding. Taking the time to educate and help people understand, maybe the controls that are in place so that the risk has actually been mitigated. There's an opportunity there to make sure that that communication is clear and that those workers do understand what controls have been implemented and how they help to keep them safe. Trust is reinforced when leaders support their team members when mistakes happen, and when leaders take ownership of their own mistakes. There's no better way to build a trusting relationship, and just to really relate to other people, especially newer young workers that are maybe just starting out in the industry and are a little nervous, maybe make a mistake here or there, to really show that we're all human and to say, I made that mistake once too, and here's what I learned from it. Let me help you out. So taking ownership of those mistakes and making it okay for people to try new things and make mistakes, of course, in a safe way, will help build that trust. Trust is sustained at the end of the day by ensuring that your words and your actions are aligned. So workers will pay attention to what their leaders do more than what they say, right? So consistency builds credibility over time. If you say you're going to do something, that's one thing, but it's when it actually gets put into action that that trust is sustained and gets stronger. And strong safety cultures are built by leaders who really, at the end of the day, create psychological health and safety, right? They have that presence where people feel, I can bring something to them and they'll deal with it. They'll take care of it. They'll keep me safe. They'll point me in the right direction. I can go and tell them that I'm not too confident in this task that I've been asked to do today, and they'll help me and get me where I need to be. They won't, shame me or talk down to me for not fully understanding what's expected. So that psychological safety is such a huge topic. And really in this webinar today, I think it does hold a really special place in the larger picture of creating those trusting relationships. Building trust is not, a soft skill. It is a critical safety control. So if your crew trusts you, they'll report hazards early, they'll ask questions, and they'll raise concerns before someone gets hurt. We talked about the internal responsibility system. It is the supervisor's role to, have that higher level of authority and ability on the site and take care of concerns and address hazards before they can hurt people. But we do need that active participation with the working group as well. And again, without that sort of trusting relationship, we may not have people bringing things to us as frequently as we would like them to. So, it comes back tenfold when you build those trusting relationships. So yeah, without this trustworthy point of contact, workers' rights can't function as intended. workers' precautions and duties could not be fulfilled properly, and were, of course, less likely to develop and maintain strong safety culture overall. Hazards stay hidden without that trust, near misses go unreported, and risk ultimately grows. So, as a supervisor, the culture that your team experiences is often shaped by how you listen, how you respond, and how you act. Of course, there are many other factors that go into the overall, culture that is felt within a team or within an organization. But in a supervisory position, you really are uniquely positioned to influence that very directly, especially with the crew you work with day in, day out. So at this point, if you're an employer, you may be thinking, what can I do to help set my supervisors up for success? How do I support them in building that trust and building that culture? And if you're a supervisor, you may be thinking, how can I continue growing in my role and gaining the trust of my crew? So let's take a look here at a couple of ideas and some resources that can help with that. So employers should focus on a couple of different things. So the first one we'll mention is communication. So open communication channels in all directions. Can be easier said than done for sure, but having that good sort of bottom to top channel of communication open, you'd be surprised how many things that you will learn or hear about, and create an environment where people feel like they can send things up the chain and it's not just coming down from top to bottom. However, something that really should come down from top to bottom is that support. So visible top-down commitment and support for the supervisors, for the outcomes on the site. I mentioned that supervisors are often balancing a lot of different needs, production schedules, those types of pressures. So being an employer that does hold safety as a top priority, and making sure that that is felt all the way down to the boots on the ground can really help, achieve a lot of the things that we've been talking about today. Another thing is supervisor specific training. So you want to ensure that supervisors have a good understanding of their legal responsibilities or their duties and precautions, understanding the worker rights, and not just, the list of worker rights, but what they really mean and how they can do their part to help exercise them and ensure that the workers on site understand how they can exercise them. The internal responsibility system and their role within that. And then, of course, things like, the theory behind doing inspections and investigations, hazard and risk assessments, as well as the specific processes for those activities under your company health and safety program. There's a lot of people in this meeting today. I'm willing to bet a lot of you have different forms and different processes and different frequencies that you use for a lot of the processes that I just mentioned. So, what specific forms do they need to use? How often are they expected to be completed? Is there any online software that they need to be familiar with that supports that process that your company uses to manage their health and safety paperwork and the program? So essentially, training in a lot of high level legal considerations, as well as just functions of the role when it relates to health and safety, overarchingly, but also very specific to your company health and safety program. Essentially setting the standard and the expectations for the role from, a very clear and actionable job description to the orientation and onboarding process and, beyond. The King case that we've been discussing showed the consequences when a supervisor does not understand their duties or the hazards that are inherent in the work that they direct. So really, we can look at training as an investment, not an expense. Many supervisors are promoted because of technical ability, not necessarily leadership experience, which we mentioned earlier. That is not necessarily a bad thing. It's not a bad thing to have people in supervisory positions that have good technical ability. They're going to lead a crew of people doing a job that they're very well versed in. That's a great way to already establish a base level of respect. However, we need to work on that leadership experience. So mentorship can help bridge that gap. So you can pair experienced supervisors with maybe some of the newer supervisors to provide guidance, coaching, practical safety advice. And this support really can significantly improve decision making and hazard recognition. So you could develop a mentorship program that formalizes this process to help ensure that your supervisors are being set up for success. Employers should also review their supervisors' performance on an ongoing basis. So regular reviews of the safety documentation that's submitted by the supervisor. So, if they're expected to lead and fill out and submit hazard assessments or fall protection plans, or, the list goes on there. Doing a review of those and sort of the quality of what is submitted, and combining that with maybe some periodic employer site inspections just to see how things are flowing on the site as they learn and grow, can really help to identify potential gaps and maybe opportunities for additional training, additional support, make sure that the expectations are very clear. Also, incorporating, health and safety into formal performance evaluations can help ensure that supervisors are meeting their responsibilities and complying with both their legislative requirements and company policies as you would expect them to be complied with. Employers should also encourage and really expect supervisors to continuously develop their knowledge as safety requirements evolve. Things are not stagnant. They don't stay the same over time. New regulations pop up, new best practices pop up. Things can change over time. So safety courses, staying current in their safety courses and their compliance training, designations like the NCSO, National Construction Safety Officer Program, webinars like the one you're attending today, subscribing to industry publications and newsletters, staying connected to industry safety associations, and joining or even developing professional networks are all things that can help keep supervisors current and up to date. So, remember that competency must be maintained and worked on and not assumed. And a well-trained and supported supervisor will stay with your company, right? They help build the competence and the culture of your workforce. They have the trust of their crew. They make well-informed decisions and ultimately contribute to the success of your business. So investing in the training, development, and whatever support is needed for a good, well-rounded supervisory team will, again, it'll come back tenfold. Speaking of courses, so Construction Safety Nova Scotia offers training designed to help supervisors understand and fulfill their responsibilities. These programs provide practical tools that supervisors can immediately apply on the job. So, the goal here is prevention through education and competency development. We always want to try to help with that where we can. As we know, training is a component of competency. So that's where we can help you out. So on your screen here, you'll see a number of courses that we offer that may be beneficial for your supervisors. We offer courses like Leadership for Safety Excellence that goes through fundamental skills in different areas, key areas for supervisors. The OHS Act course takes a deep dive into the legislation. Courses like Hazard Identification and Control and Accident Incident Investigation can help develop competency in those specific areas. Even Train the Trainer can help with understanding training delivery methods and engaging an adult audience in a learning environment. So if you have supervisors that are doing any sort of in-house training or developing short training sessions, for the crews that you work with, that could be a beneficial thing that would help them really develop very impactful training sessions. Fall Protection Supervisor dives a little deeper into the fall protection elements covered in Fall Protection Basic, dives deeper into safe work plans and procedures, a little bit about hands-on inspection of fall protection equipment that can really help supervisors feel more confident in supervising that work, even helping workers with their pre-use inspections, things like that. that. Psychological injury prevention helps with understanding psychological health and safety and doing your part to mitigate psychosocial hazards. And then we also have a few e-learning courses that relate to mental health and supporting workers who may be struggling as well. We also offer loads of other courses from confined space to forklift operator, pretty much everything in between, and full descriptions of each course that we offer are available on our website. In addition to training, members have access to free advisory services. So whether you need help understanding regulations, conducting assessments, developing procedures or programs, our team of advisors is here to help you. So we're just a phone call or a click away. Our office is open 8 to 4, Monday to Friday. Feel free to give us a call. We can schedule a meeting. We can drop by your site. Even just a quick phone call or an email exchange. If you have a quick question, whatever is needed to help, please do feel free to hit us up. A conversation today really can help prevent a serious incident tomorrow. And at the end of the day, that's what Construction Safety Nova Scotia is here for. We are your industry association. We are here to help you. So please do reach out. One of our advisors would be more than happy to answer any questions that you have. So on that note, I'll just put our contact information up here really quickly as well. So there's our phone numbers. We do have a toll free if you're outside of HRM. We're on Instagram and Facebook. We do have, of course, our website. We have a little picture of our website here. Pretty easy to navigate from core to training to whatever you're looking to access, mental health resources, lots of great stuff. And then the email, if you're looking to reach out, is there as well, info@constructionsafetyns.ca. So I'd like to close today by returning to Michael Henderson. As I said, Michael was 18 years old. He had recently graduated from high school and was beginning his career in construction, and the court found that a series of preventable supervisory failures contributed to his death. So the lesson here for us is very clear. Safety leadership matters, communication matters, and competent supervision is critical. Every supervisor has the authority to influence outcomes, and every employer has a responsibility to ensure that supervisors are equipped to succeed. If we learn from cases like this and act on those lessons, we can prevent future tragedies and ensure workers return home safely every day. So I encourage each of you to find just one thing that you can do this week that will make your workplace safer and stronger. Regardless of your role, regardless of your title, you've got the power to make a difference. So, even a small rock makes a ripple. So that concludes our presentation today. Thank you again so much for taking the time to join us. And I'll throw it back over to Ryan to lead off our Q&A session.
Thank you, Kyla. Very informative. So we have a few questions that have come in, and I encourage everyone else to keep submitting some if you have something you'd like to have Kyla answer. So let's start off. What is the best way for a supervisor to address unsafe behavior with their crew without damaging trust or morale?
That's a good question. I think again it comes down to approach a lot of the time, right? Building those relationships early will definitely help with that. And you want to come at things, I think, from an informative perspective. If it's very serious, we need to act quickly, and we can talk about relationships maybe after we get the serious hazard dealt with. But generally, again, coming at things from a educational perspective and like a mentoring perspective, this is, to me, approaches everything. I think that's what I would say there. Psychological health and safety is a huge piece. People are going to make mistakes from time to time. Again, you might need to address things more quickly if they're more hazardous, but if it's something that we can just kind of safely remove someone from the situation, educate, help implement the control, review the hazard assessment again, it doesn't have to be something that damages relationships.
Thank you, Kyla.
Mm.
Got another question that segues nicely from that. Um, and the person here is asking, what is the most difficult part of holding peers, fellow supervisors, and long-term employees accountable? So what's the most difficult part there?
Most difficult part of holding peers and supervisors accountable. I would say again, I like a lot of stuff for me comes down to relationships, and how those are built or maintained. If we haven't established relationships or expectations early on, it can be difficult and maybe feel a little bit abrasive in the moment if we're not used to that process. So again, I think those clear job descriptions, so we don't get to a place where it's a long-term issue, setting expectations early, ensuring that processes are clear, ensuring that training is adequate. Um, I think there's a lot of room that we have to set people off in the right direction right away, so we don't get to that place. Did I answer that question? I couldn't remember.
Yeah, no, thank you. So yeah, clear expectations, solid
Yeah.
relationships,
Mhm.
um, really help
And
us when
ongoing
we provide
feedback.
feedback.
Yeah, ongoing feedback. There it is, right? If the issue is ongoing, people shouldn't hear about it. I mentioned performance evaluations. They shouldn't hear about it once a year. It should be ongoing. You don't have to save every piece of feedback for an annual meeting or a quarterly meeting. Address things ongoing. And again, if you're creating that culture where people can make mistakes and people can learn from each other, we've got these mentorship programs. We want to create a culture where it doesn't feel heavy to have those conversations. And I do recognize that's easier said than done. But if we put in the work, we can get there.
Thank you for that. You've just answered another question right there
Oh,
about creating the
great.
culture. So fantastic.
Mhm.
Let's look at another one. And this is more, I think you've discussed a bit in your presentation. And we'll treat it as a hypothetical. So if I'm supervising work, but I don't have the formal title of a four-person supervisor, manager, and so on, am I still legally responsible for any outcomes there from that work?
Interesting. Interesting question. Good question. And funnily enough, a conversation that I actually have quite often with what I do. So I'm also an auditor. I know there are a few people in this meeting we may have crossed paths before in that capacity. And I do often have a lot of conversations about, supervisors or foremen or, I hear, well, it's just they're a working foreman, so they're not really a supervisor. And I'm like, well, there is some stuff out there as we covered today that does say anyone in any capacity, like it's pretty broad, right? Especially from the criminal code. So if you're directing work or influencing how work is performed in any way, shape, or form, that piece of federal legislation could apply to you. So yeah, it's something that needs to be considered, regardless of a formal title.
Perfect. Thank you. Great answer. Couple more questions left. And again, encourage anyone else to put them out there, but you can always contact us and we can address those later on.
Mhm.
Um, so what leadership behavior do you find has the biggest impact on safety performance?
Another great question. Um, I don't want to be a broken record here. A lot of stuff just goes back to relationship building to me. I think humility is a big one. Um, there's nothing worse than when someone can't admit to their own mistakes. So that's why I've been kind of emphasizing that piece throughout the presentation and even in these questions. I think humility is huge because people don't want to, nobody necessarily wants to appear like they're not sure of something or they don't know how to go about something. But um, humility in leadership, I think, goes a really, really long way because you get viewed then as someone who is also just human, has probably made some of the same mistakes that you've just made, and there's someone then that you can feel comfortable in bringing those mistakes to, kind of really just forming those relationships better.
Well said. So we have a couple more questions.
All
More
right.
just came in.
Keep them coming.
And It's going to look at a bit of contractor management. So how does the oversight of
Hmm.
subcontractors fall into the parent company or the general contractor constructor there?
How does it fall into the prime contractor, like the general
Yeah, so I'll
contractor?
paraphrase, subcontractor management and the
Mhm.
relationship there with the company that has contracted them, the general contractor, the constructor.
Hmm. So the question is, how does this apply in that context? Like if we're
And what
supervising subtrades?
responsibilities fall onto the
Right.
parent company there, the main
Um,
Company.
Sure. Well, I mean, we've talked about the criminal code, so I won't go back to that element, but our OHS Act does not only define the duties and precautions for employers and for employees, but it also does define duties and responsibilities for contractors and for constructors. So they're very similar in their spirit. They are shorter sections because, of course, anyone that is operating as a constructor, which for reference would be like the general contractor, the owner of the project, and then a contractor, which would be maybe more of the subcontractor that's reporting into that general contractor. Those are still employers and employees at the end of the day, right? So a lot of those similar things do apply. However, our act does state that constructors, so again, general contractors, people that own those projects, do have a higher duty to protect those at or near the project. And then also they have a duty to make sure that the communication and activities of both those who are their direct employees and those whose services they have contracted are managed, planned out properly. And so that they have that sort of greater influence and organizational aspect to the role. So as far as supervision goes, we're not expected to directly supervise every worker of our subtrades. However, we are expected to create subcontractor management programs that put those expectations on the companies that you hire. So you need to make sure that the companies that you're hiring have a base level of requirements. You want them to have their WCB, you want them to have insurance, you want them to probably have their core certification and prove that they have a safety program that is implemented and managed. You want to ensure that and this can all be part of your contract or your tendering language, right? That they're going to have adequate supervision, that people are well trained. So you might not be directly responsible for accounting for every single person and supervising their work, but you want to set the expectations that your subcontractors will do those things and then have a process in place to monitor that and ensure that they're committing to doing hazard assessments, they're doing them, they're submitting them to you. You are still doing inspections of your site, so that will include areas where your subcontractors are working, things like that. So yeah, it's not a direct, day to day, but you do have to have mechanisms in place to control it, manage it, and, maybe even evaluate it and determine when people shouldn't be on your job sites.
Thanks, Kyla.
Mhm.
So yeah, more about, there's still that supervision element, the contractor management and
Mhm.
how that is addressed. And again, we're always happy to help out with
Mhm.
developing programs and providing guidance for anybody on that. So one more question, and we'll look at the positive side of it too. But what's one common mistake new supervisors seem to make?
Oh, good question. Um, a common mistake that new supervisors seem to make. It might just be underestimating um, what the role really means, right? Um, and I think I'll, even speak from personal experience because when you're someone that maybe does the job super well or for a long time, it seems like maybe the supervision aspect is a natural and easy next progression, but there's more that comes with it, right? So I think that's probably something, maybe a misstep or just a misalignment in that assumption of what that role is really going to look like or feel like. So that goes back to what we talked about today around, this person may be great at actually supervising the work in terms of the quality of the work and how it's performed and really understanding the safety aspect of the work. But those leadership qualities, right? And making sure that they're responsible for the paperwork side of things and all the other aspects that they're used to doing, but maybe not used to having that sort of ultimate responsibility for, building those relationships, all those things that we mentioned. So I think it's just maybe sometimes an assumption of something being pretty easy or pretty natural when there is some work that needs to go into it. And that's where employers can help as well with helping to kind of lay out those plans, and make it very clear and actionable for their supervisors as they progress or develop into their roles.
Again, well said. Thank you for that. So I don't see any more questions coming in. Um, Again, we'll end on give us a call, send us an email. We've got
Mhm.
a team of OHS advisors here that are happy to assist you in supporting your supervisors, developing programs, and so on. And thank you, Kyla. Fantastic,
Thank
informative
you.
presentation. And on that note, we will say goodbye for today.
All right.
Thanks, folks.
Thanks,
Take
everyone.
care.